There comes a moment when something quietly settles inside you and it surprises you. You don't miss anyone. Not because you stopped caring, not because you planned to disappear. You didn't decide to cut people off or make a dramatic exit. You simply stopped reaching. One message goes unanswered. One invitation feels too heavy to accept. You stop explaining yourself. You stop trying to be understood. People notice. They always do. They say you've changed. They call you cold. They talk about you in places you no longer go. But psychologically, this isn't distance. It's self-protection. You felt alone long before you walked away. This didn't happen suddenly. You didn't become heartless. You ran out of what you were giving. For years you were the reliable one. You were the person others turned to in distress. You noticed details others missed. You asked how people were doing, and you stayed present for the answer. You stayed calm when others felt overwhelmed. You showed up even when it was inconvenient. You were always there, until one day you reached your limit. Not because you were weak, but because you had been giving for too long without being held in return. So you did the healthy thing. You reached out. You asked for support. What met you wasn't cruelty. It was silence. And when silence happens again and again, your mind learns something important. Maybe someone replied with a short acknowledgement. Maybe someone promised to call and never did. Maybe you were told they were busy, distracted, overwhelmed. It wasn't that no one existed. It was that no one showed up when you finally needed them. That's when you understood something clearly. You had been carrying yourself alone for a long time. In that moment, the truth became hard to ignore. The support was never equal. One felt like care was often people getting used to you always being available, always listening, always adjusting, always holding things together. After that, your thinking changed. You started noticing how much energy things took and how little came back. You didn't want to keep score, but your body did it for you. The imbalance showed up as exhaustion, withdrawal, and quiet resentment you didn't even want to feel. You were giving while already tired, to people who were not empty. So you changed. You stopped giving what you no longer had. People noticed the shift immediately. They usually do when you stop being useful. You stopped being constantly available. You stopped reaching out first. You stopped bending yourself to fit everyone else. As invitations faded, the labels came out. You're different now. You've changed. You're colder. But it wasn't coldness. It was you stepping out of a role you had been playing for a long time. They wanted the version of you who always said yes, who always made space, who always put others first. What they didn't see was that this version couldn't survive. Before you fully understood it, your body already had. It learned the pattern. You connect, you give too much, and you are left alone to manage the emotional aftermath. So your mind began expecting the ending, not because you were bitter, but because you were protecting yourself. This wasn't negativity. It was experience turning into caution. Over time, you started controlling the one thing you could, how close you let people get, when you pull back, when you leave. If loss felt unavoidable, choosing the moment felt safer, not easier, but predictable. And predictability is how the nervous system feels safe. That's why you changed. That's why they call you cold. And that's why it's okay. Because when you needed help, nobody was there. This pattern did not begin in adulthood. It started much earlier. In childhood, your nervous system learned something important about closeness. You learned that people could be physically present and still emotionally unavailable, that care could feel conditional, that comfort was inconsistent. Over time, you noticed that expressing need created tension. Emotions felt inconvenient to others. Asking for support often led to withdrawal instead of response. So you adapted. You cried less. You asked for less. You learned how to manage distress on your own. These experiences hurt, but they taught you something. Your brain learned one clear lesson. Needing people leads to pain. You learned to be independent because you had to. It came from having no other option. You learned to depend on yourself, to protect yourself. Expecting nothing lowered the risk of disappointment. You learned early what relationships expect from you and what they take. And in adulthood, similar dynamics felt familiar, not because they were healthy, but because they matched what your nervous system already knew. Over time, you learned to notice when people started pulling away, when the distance appeared before it was obvious. You began to see who only reached out when they needed something, and who stayed present when life was easy but disappeared when it wasn't. You're always watching for signs you never chose to watch for: effort, timing, follow through. Not because you want to keep score, but because your body remembers what happens when you miss the signs. You recognize the pattern. Replies get shorter, plans stay unclear, and presence slowly fades. Now, when you sense the shift, you adjust first. You reduce contact. You stop initiating. You pause to see if they make any effort. Most of the time there isn't, so you disengage early. Not out of anger, not to punish, but because experience has taught you how this ends. This isn't avoidance, it's pattern recognition. Some people say you gave up on people. That isn't true. What you gave up was pretending that conditional acceptance meant real care. You stopped shrinking yourself to fit. You stopped performing to earn a place. You stopped explaining yourself to people who were never trying to understand you. Pulling back wasn't giving up on connection. It was refusing a hollow version of it. You reached a point where you understood something clearly. If relationships only work when you do all the emotional labor, then distance is healthier than constant effort. You are not cold. You are tired of bleeding quietly while no one noticed you were hurt. People say you built walls. What you actually built were boundaries. The deepest loneliness didn't come after you stepped away. It came before, when you were surrounded by people and still felt invisible, when you were in relationships and still felt alone. Being alone didn't create the loneliness. It simply removed the illusion. When you look back, you don't miss most of those people. You miss the version of yourself who still believed the connection was mutual. That version almost didn't survive. Leaving is what saved you. Others may call it avoidance. You know it was self-preservation. You weren't running away. You were moving toward quiet. Not the quiet of emptiness, but the quiet of safety. Maybe one day you'll open up again. Maybe you'll meet someone who makes connection feel steady instead of threatening. For now, you're protecting what's left of your capacity to hope. This is your nervous system saying enough. Enough over-giving. Enough disappearing inside relationships. You're not the problem. You are someone who learned that being alone is less painful than being unseen. You stopped waiting for others to show up and started showing up for yourself. The silence isn't empty. It holds the peace you never had in the noise. You are not cold. You are surviving. And for the first time, you are choosing yourself.